Hello, hello, and welcome everyone to In Time. My name is Nicholas Lamar Souter. Thank you all for joining us. Before we begin, just a very quick what we've got coming up because we've got a pretty full schedule. We've got Stephen. Hold on, let me just. This is what happens when you have too many open windows. Stephen Sheaves is going to be coming up on the 26th. We're going to be discussing uh, are atheists genuinely more rational than theists? Also, then after that, we're going to have our patron hangout Monday the 2nd. It's not too late to become a patron if you want to support the show in that way. There are many other ways to support the show too. Just like and subscribe is always a big help. So if you want just an easy way to support the show, please smash that like button, hit the subscribe button, and that helps us out. Tuesday, the 3rd, we are going to be doing election coverage. My hope is that that's not going to turn into devolve into coverage of the end times, but it's possible. So come join us for that. On the 8th, we are going to have we're going to stream to the Discord a episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation. It's going to be the it's called a Matter of Perspective, where Will Riker is tried for murder. And basically, there are three perspectives of the exact same thing that happened, and two sort of land him in prison. One exonerates him, and the question is, how can you have this when the everybody witnessed the same thing, and they have three different points of view on it. On the 16th, November 16th, a Rorschach. We're going to have on Christopher Mouty, and we're going to be discussing the human Rorschach, how people are at least as much of yeah, Mouty may be intoxicated. I think we all may have to do a good amount of drinking to get through the second, but we're going to have a number of people on for that, including I'll cover that as we get closer, and then we're going to do the Rorschach one. What is how are people as much a projection of what we want to see or what we do see on them as opposed to what they really are, and then music therapy on the 23rd. But at this precise moment, we have on Dr. Phil Zuckerman to discuss raising secular children in the United States of America. Dr. Zuckerman, you said I could call you Phil, so Phil, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for
Just don't
joining
call
us.
me, just don't call me Dr. Phil.
Dr. Phil, I thought didn't even cross my mind until thank you for that one. So, Dr. Phil, um, we well, you had mentioned you've got your degree in sociology. On the flip side, I never got my degree, so that's still a good deal more than I. But I appreciate you joining us. So, one of the things is it strikes me that the U.S. is we're descendant from Puritans. We take religion very seriously here, much more so than I think most other industrialized nations. I do think there are some unique challenges to raising your children secular here. We raise our children without religion. So I'd like to just sort of as a start get what are your thoughts on the overall question of raising your children secular in the United States.
Thanks for having me. I think the big factor there is depends where. So there are certain secular swaths of the United States, whether it be Eugene, Oregon, or Malibu, California, or probably some neighborhoods in Austin, Texas, certainly Vermont. There are certain areas, parts of Colorado, where most people are non church attending, non synagogue attending, non mosque attending, not big believers, not big prayers. And in fact, the default norm is a kind of not in your, kind of like thoughtless secularity. And by thoughtless, I mean it's just a secularity by default. It's not an active, engaged secularism per se. On the other hand, one county over or one neighborhood over, you can have religion pervading every aspect of private and public life. So there are schools that are, full of Christian prayer groups. There are school boards that are full of Christian evangelicals. I'm stumbling on the word because I'm so fearful of how they're destroying the world right now.
Yeah.
You have entire counties, school boards, city councils run by Christian people, little leagues that begin with Christian prayers. There are some neighborhoods in America that are extremely Muslim. There are some neighborhoods that are extremely Jewish. So the big answer to you would be, it depends what state, what county, what neighborhood. So I'm going to say, I'll end this by saying, to raise your kids secular in this country ranges from the complete easy, painless, joyful to the terrifying, threatening, frightening, and oppressed, and alienating, and everything in between.
All right. You definitely have a degree in sociology. Thank you for equivocating that one from A to Z. Uh, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's actually a spectacular answer. So I'm in Massachusetts, which is one of the more liberal states in the United States, and I had thought that we wouldn't have too many difficulties. But one of the interesting things is, so we've raised our children secular. There's an old joke. A woman tells her mother that she's going to be raising her children without believing in God, and her mother said, "Well, oh, dear Lord, it's okay to raise your children non-religious. It's okay to raise them secular. Just for whatever you do, don't raise them atheist." And I I think we may get into language here a little bit, but we taught one of the things that we did decide we were going to teach our kids reasonably early on was to not talk about it, and to first of all, it's sort of like Santa Claus. We never had a belief in Santa Claus in this house, and what we told them, look, there are other families who enjoy it. The parents tell their kids that Santa Claus is real. It's not your job to disabuse them of that and stay out of it. And one of the children was very good about it. The other one was like, there's no Santa Claus. So we try to do the same thing with religion. And one of the things that ended up happening was one of the parents, because I had gotten into a discussion with someone else about they'd seen something on the show and all this other stuff. One of the parents, who was Catholic, and she was a parent of one of my daughter's best friends, found out that we were atheist, and then all of a sudden, poof, no more play dates with our youngest. Now, our youngest, well, with one of our children. At any rate, they couldn't come over anymore. They're just sort of once a week they were coming, and now it's just we see them at school functions. They go to the other side of the. So I may be projecting, but it strikes me that this came as a result of them learning that we are atheists, and she doesn't want her child associating with that. So how common a problem do you think that is? Is that something that, that can't be unique to atheists or secular families, but it does strike me as an issue.
I think it's more common than people realize. Absolutely. I think just as there are people who won't let their kids go to a house that is a same-sex couple, for example. I've known many friends who have had that experience. I think there are some or won't let their kids go to a house of people of a different race or religion. I think there are some families out there that think atheists are immoral, and they would rather their child get, raped by a priest than go to a neighbor's house who might be an atheist. So I think that's just par for the course. On the flip side, not to shamelessly plug, but I did once write a book called Living the Secular Life, and that book does actually have a chapter called Raising Kids. I received a lot of emails from people. The one that was one of the more favorite ones was I got an email from an evangelical pastor, I believe in Florida, who, I don't know why he read my book. Maybe he wanted to understand, secular people in America or something. He read my book and he said, oh, I never let my children go to the homes of non-religious people, but now I see, you're not monsters. You do have a ethic of sort. You do have a moral outlook of sorts. So thanks for your book. Now I'm letting my kids play at the neighbor's house or whatever. So I don't have any hard data on how many families in America will or won't let their kids play at an atheist house or go to an atheist house. I just have the anecdotal evidence, which is that it's very common. I mean, there is a stigma attached to atheists. I know kindergarten teachers who are atheists who could never make that known in their public school and their place of employment. I know doctors and psychiatrists and surgeons who are atheists but can never let that be known in their place of employment, lest it destroy the hearts of their staff, the nurses, their patients. So from surgeons to kindergarten teachers and everybody in between, I know many, many people who have to keep it hidden, either because they fear repercussions at work or their kids won't be allowed to play with your kids or whatnot. And there is some data on just people who have experienced discrimination as a result of their secularity. The last thing I'll say is I recently saw a study about 2 or 3 weeks ago. We could look it up on Google, and the details, I may get it a little wrong, but some academics, they wrote, I don't know, 3 or 5 or 600 letters to principals at public elementary schools throughout the country. And the letter was basically the same. It said, hi, we're Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so. We've got 3 kids, Buffy, Billy, and Bob, and we are moving to your community, and we're looking into schools, and we saw your elementary school, and we're really interested, and we would love to learn a little bit more, and will we be welcome here? Is this an inclusive environment, et cetera, et cetera. The letters were the exact same, except for the difference that some of them said we are a Catholic family or we're a Christian family and we're looking for X, Y, and Z. And the other letter said we are an atheist family from such and such. We're moving to your town and we look forward to coming to your school. These are public schools. They weren't sending these letters to Christian academies or Catholic academies or Jewish yeshivas or Muslim day schools. And they just wanted to see what kind of responses they would get. And what they found was the principals basically wouldn't even respond to the letters from ostensibly parents who self-identified as atheists. So it wasn't that they got nasty letters back, but it was just that the principals were like, we're not going to touch this family. Yeah. So I don't have I can't say to you, 12% of parents don't want their kids playing with atheists or 78%. All I can say is your experience is not unique. I've heard many anecdotal stories like that. I've had people that I've interviewed say they live in small towns, and every single person they ever run into is constantly asking them where they go to church and why don't they go to church, and their children ought to be in church. Their children, I interviewed this one couple for Living the Secular Life, that book I mentioned, whose children were getting harassed on the schoolyard, and when the parents brought the issue to the teacher was like, well, they really should be in church, then this wouldn't happen. So then they went to the principal and said, my kids are getting harassed on the schoolyard. And the principal said, well, they really should be in church. Here's my church. And if they would go to church, this wouldn't happen. So you're actually being bad parents by not raising your kids in church. And any teasing and taunting and harassing they're getting on the schoolyard is a natural consequence of your atheism. Now, that was, of course, down in Kentucky or Mississippi or one of those Bible Belt red states full of COVID. But there you go.
So I also find, I want to get back to that. And by the way, we dropped a link to your Twitter. It should be in the description. My bad. It's not in the description. We will update the video so that your Twitter and the video and anything else that if you have a website, anything like that, send it to me. We'll make sure that gets in the description. But most of that is going to be dropped also in the Discord. In fact, we've dropped your website and your Twitter in the Discord already. Thank you, Tony. And but I've heard it said too, just based on slightly off topic, but I think it's roughly the same, that we would probably elect a Muslim president before we elected an atheist one, at least an openly atheist one. Does that sound true to you? Obviously, unless somebody's actually done any study, but that strikes me as even after 9/11, which of course I think Muslims as a whole got disproportionately. There's nuance there, but this country has had a very anti-Muslim streak in it, especially since 9/11, and but I still think it would be easier to elect an open Muslim to president than an open atheist.
It's possible. I've seen a lot of studies on this. They're always hypothetical, right? Because it doesn't take into account the actual candidate, how charismatic he or she is, how photogenic, and all those really important things that matter to Americans. Um, or how many porn stars they've shot their load on or whatever. But I will say that
That doesn't seem to matter as much as I would have thought it did, but
no,
nonetheless,
no,
please
I think
continue.
people enjoy it. I think there's a real vicarious pleasure from that. One study I can just cite from Gallup, this is a few years, it's about 5 or 6 years old now. It asked, oh no, sorry, that's the 2014. I think that was Pew. Gallup did a more recent one in 2019, where they said, would you be willing to vote for a qualified candidate for president if they were black? And 96% of Americans said yes. What if they were Catholic? 95% of Americans said yes. What if they were Hispanic? 95% of Americans said yes. What if they were a woman? 94% said yes. What if they were Jewish? 93% said yes. What if they were an evangelical Christian? 80%. Gay and lesbian? 76%. Under the age of 40? 71%. Muslims, 66%. So 66 of people questioned this in this random sample said that they would be willing to vote for a Muslim candidate for president. What if they were an atheist? Only 60% of Americans. That's now a majority. It used to be under 50% back 20 years ago. So 60% of Americans said they'd be willing to vote for an atheist. The only one that came below us, believe it or not, was a socialist. Only 47% said they'd be willing to vote for a socialist. So Bernie
Well, and
Sanders may have been in trouble, God bless him, or Pan bless him. But so no, I think you're right. There's a stigma to Islam, to be sure, and Muslims bear the brunt of violence and hatred every day in this country. But atheists also have a stigma. I don't think we are harassed as much, or graffitied as much, or threatened as much publicly, but the stigma is there. And so, according to this data, at least, you are absolutely correct that here, I'll post this too, that atheists would very much have a hard time getting elected. There's that article that I recently wrote in The Conversation. Why is it so hard for an atheist to get elected into our Congress? And you can see that data.
I will put that up in the Discord in a minute. Although now the Pew study that you referenced, was that also the one that said that in regards to trust, that atheists were trusted at about the same level as was it child molesters, or was it rapists in general? I forget which it was.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In fact, in many people's minds, they're the same. Will Gervais is a social psychologist in Kentucky who he's at the forefront of this awesome research. He's really skilled, he's really sharp, and he's got a lot of resources available. So yeah, he's done a lot of research with many subjects, and what he finds again and again and again is that people have a gut, knee-jerk, visceral association of atheism with immorality. They think atheists are simply immoral, that we're more likely to rape and steal and murder and even be cannibals. I think it's pure projection. I think theistic morality is a house of cards, a dangerous house of cards. So I think what's happening is people are actually projecting their own broken moral compasses onto us. But anyway, that's the reality. Until more of us come out, until those sweet kindergarten teachers come out, and those amazing surgeons come out, and those wise judges, and those kind neighbors, until people come out and say, I am a non-believer, I'm an atheist, and look, I'm a good person, I'm a good citizen, then we're going to have that stigma.
That well, that perfectly dovetails into the next question I was going to ask, but I wanted to the other one was I actually had this was a relative of mine who was talking about raising children secular, and what I told them was, they said, you really need to raise your children Christian. There's so many reasons for that. It doesn't really matter what denomination. And as soon as they say that, just sitting there going, okay, you've opened up a whole can of worms if you don't care which denomination. But the one of the things that they had said was, I said, well, look, we're teaching them about Jesus Christ. We teach them about the Bible. My daughter knows more about the Bible than most Christians. I also teach her about the Bhagavad Gita. I teach her about Hindu polytheism, what do witches believe. We went down to the Salem to see, we spent an entire day in Salem, and we went over all the witch trials and all that. Now, all that obviously has nothing to do with Wiccan, but nonetheless, we discussed the matter. I said, what I do is I teach them as much as I can about all of it and let them choose. Like, oh my God, no, don't do that. I was just like, okay, that was literally, so, no, you can't teach them all of it equally. That's apparently not what they want. But so you had mentioned morality. So what do you find is the largest sticking point for people in regards to raising children? Is it morality? It seems like that's what you're saying. Is it something else? Is there, and where does this misconception come from?
Well, are you asking me, is the morality issue the sticking point for parents who don't want their kids to play with atheists? Or are you asking me, where does this um, connection between atheism and immorality come from?
Well, I'm asking both on the assumption that the answer to the first one is going to be yes, it's immorality. But so clearly there is something objectionable to a number of Americans to raising your children atheist. A, what is that objection? And then B, what is the source
Oh,
of where did people get these ideas that make them think that this is a huge issue?
okay. So all the research I'm aware of is that yes, it is the morality issue. So it's not that people think, don't go around atheists because they have too many pets, or don't go around atheists because they're unwashed, or don't go around atheists because they don't know how to dance, or don't go around atheists because they yell too loud. It is, you don't want to be around atheists because they are immoral. Atheism is immoral. So that's, again, Will Gervais' research confirms that. My own in-depth interviews confirm that. Crystal Manning's written a book on raising secular kids and secular families. And so that seems to be the consensus, that yes, it's that. And I even know many people who have said to me, well, I'm not religious, but I feel like I need to raise my kid in religion so they have some morality. Like, I'm going to go check out the church on the corner just because I want them to have some morals, which is, so grossly insane. I don't even know where to begin. If any place teaches a distorted and depraved version of morality, it's any theistic religion. Okay, so now you're asking, why is there this association? That's trickier. So I think there's many factors. So factor number one is historical. People associate atheism with immorality because that's what religion has been trumpeting since it began. So all the early religions, when Judaism began, when Christianity began, when Islam began, I'll just stick with those. The East gets a little more complicated because Jainism is atheistic and versions of Buddhism are atheistic and Hinduism's too psychedelic for me. So I'm just going to stick with the two largest religions in the world, Christianity and Islam, and then the source of those religions, which is Judaism, which is numerically quite small but influentially quite large. Okay, in all of those religions, when they were established, they had to explicitly say, if you don't believe in this Father God, you're damned, you're going to hell. And the reason, and this Father God has rules, and we have to obey those rules. And if we obey them, we get rewarded. And if we don't obey them, we get punished. I mean, it's very infantile. It's explicitly based on a kind of patriarchal, daddy's in charge and we'll kick your ass if you misbehave, or we'll reward you if you do his bidding. And that's been, and since those religious traditions had a monopoly on publishing, once the first thing that was mass produced with a printing press was the Bible. I mean, as soon as people were able to write, they were writing these religious narratives. As soon as people were able to print anything, they were printing these religious narratives. And religion was the dominant cultural force in much of the Western civilization for thousands of years. So they've had simply the marketing, they've had the branding capability for thousands of years. So that's just the kind of like the Bible's very clear. The atheist says in his heart, there is no God. He's a fool. He can do no good. The New Testament, he's damned. In Islam, he's going to hell. Even in Hindu scriptures, there in the Bhagavad Gita, there are statements about non-believers being wicked and so on and so forth. So that's been the narrative. And that is probably a huge part of it. Next, I would say that the notion that we can only be good if an all-powerful eye is watching us at all times, that's very powerful. In fact, there are social psychological studies showing that people will be more honest if they're being told they're being watched. people will act more ethically if you simply tape two large eyes on the wall over them when they're in the lab doing some kind of, and they're asked to do some kind of activity, and if they even just see like literally drawings of eyes watching them. So we have I think a bioevolutionary predisposition to not want to get in trouble and to want to please the boss or the daddy or whatnot. But what I would say is then there is, I think, projection going on in that theistic morality is so brittle and corrosive because it basically is about moral outsourcing. It's saying, I am not the arbiter of what causes pain, what causes suffering, what causes well-being. It's not my conscience that I have to obey. It's not the suffering of the person in front of me that I have to respond to. It's these rules from a magical, invisible deity who I have to obey. And obedience is an abdication of moral autonomy. Obedience is the opposite, right? If you just obey orders, you have given up moral deliberation. You have actually just thrown asunder your own moral conscience, your own moral deliberation, and you're outsourcing it. And so at the root of any theistic worldview is a moral outsourcing. It's saying, I'm just going to do whatever the boss tells me to do, and I'm trying to save my own ass, and I'm doing it out of fear. That is, again, a gross abdication of moral responsibility. So I actually think theists can't comprehend what a truly mature ethical orientation is all about. It's too bizarre to them. It's too free. It's too subjective. It's too mature. It's too responsible. It's too adult-like. So their own lack of a moral compass gets projected onto atheists. And they think, well, if you don't believe in God, you must be immoral. And I know that's a kind of convoluted psychologizing, but I do think that's what goes on there. And then finally, I think religions are selling a product. They have to make money or they're going to sink. Some of them have monopolies. Some of them are subsidized by taxes. Some of them are subsidized by charity and donations, but they have to have a reason for existing. And if they can tell people you're going to go to hell, or unless you follow our teachings or believe in our prophet, that's some pretty good shit. And if you can tell them we're the purveyors of morality in society, well, everybody wants to be moral, so that's some pretty good shit as well. But what we're seeing is the data is so explicit that the most secular democracies today have the most moral and ethical societies, the lowest murder rates, the lowest abuse rates, the lowest violence rates, the lowest poverty rates, the lowest starvation rates, the most functioning democracies. So, all you have to do all you have to do, it's not so easy. But when you provide the data to people, hopefully some of that will sink into at least the more thoughtful ones. Obviously, people that are wedded to irrational beliefs, no amount of rational argumentation is going to penetrate that.
So
sorry for rambling.
No. Well, listen, you're preaching to the choir. This is not a atheist YouTube channel, but most of the people who work on End Time are liberals and at a minimum secular. Some of us are anti-theists. So you're preaching to the choir. I do have Christopher Columbus. Oh, sorry, that's Mouty. Christopher Muzzy in the live chat. Some Italian guy in the live chat. Quote, it's almost like someone read one of your books, Dr. Phil, and suggested Nick host you on this topic based on he's always trying to take credit for all our stuff. I don't know. We have him on occasion, and now he's just all like, he thinks he's but. So now, thank you very much to Christopher who did hook us up. We really sincerely appreciate that. So what was one of the things when you were working on your book? What was one of the things that shocked you the most, do you think, when doing the research for your book?
I hate to be a jerk, but which book are you talking about?
I'm speaking specifically living the secular life. New answers to old questions.
Let's see. I'd have to really think about that. But since we're talking about secular parenting, I will stick to that. What I don't know if shock's the right word, but something that I felt was nowhere articulated, but is really, I think, a pronounced issue. And it maybe speaks to your own experience as a secular parent, certainly speaks to mine, but many of the people that I interviewed for that book, It goes like this. I think there's a particular challenge that secular parents face, a paradox that religious parents don't. And it's one of the disadvantages of being a secular parent. And it goes like this. If you're a believing member of a religious faith, then imparting that identity and those beliefs onto your child is a very clear and, if anything, joyful process. So if you're a believing Jew or believing Muslim or believing Christian, then it is your duty and obligation to raise that child in the truth of these doctrines, to enmesh them in the rituals, and it's nice and it's fun and by clear I mean it's not a second guess thing. It's actually a very direct line of communication. Like, yes, Jesus is king. Jesus died for our sins. Muhammad is the prophet of Allah, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if you don't believe this, you're going to go to hell, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a direct line between your own ethos and what you're imparting to your child. Most secular people in America today were raised with some religion, right? They at some point they rejected it. That's not going to be the case in 30 or 40 or 60 years. But right now, most people were raised with some religion and then they rejected it. And part of that rejection was realizing that the religion was foisted upon them. It was imposed upon them. They didn't have a choice. They were only taught about that religion. They were only taught those beliefs. And in a sense, the real bitter ones call it brainwashing. Hey, I was brainwashed. I was forced to go to Sunday school and forced to go to Bible camp, and my parents forced this and rammed it down my throat. Okay, so they don't like that dynamic, that imposing, that foisting upon. And so they become adults. They have children of their own. And because of their integrity, they say, well, I don't want to commit the same crime. I don't want to do the same misdeed. I don't want to force my worldview on my child. So there's a kind of self-reflection that takes place that is paradoxical because you think your worldview is right or you wouldn't maintain it. It's not like I'm in doubt. I'm like, yeah,
Presumably, yes.
I don't see any evidence for God. And I think these Christian doctrines are damaging. I firmly believe that. And yet, I am not supposed to teach that directly to my child lest I commit the same crime of imposing my worldview on them. This is a dilemma or a paradox that the religious parent completely sidesteps and gets to completely avoid, whereas we suffer from it. So I interviewed all these parents who said things like, well, I don't want to impose my atheism or my agnosticism on my kid. But if you're a parent, it is impossible not to. Even if you try your damnedest, they're going to hear you talk to your friends. What, are you not supposed to have conversation around the dinner table lest your friend hear you call, the Catholic pedophile priest scandal horrific? Oh, mustn't predispose my child to be anti-Catholic. Are you not supposed to comment on a movie that you saw, A Serious Man and how silly those rabbis were? I mean, it is impossible to not influence your child's worldview. And in fact, most of us want to influence our child's worldview because we feel like we're making the world a better place by doing so. We want to create ethical children. We want to create independent thinkers, people that care about climate change, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's just this, you said, well, I try to teach my kid about all these things. You know full well that even that is going to be a enlightening, enriching, but debunking process. I mean, we know that when people are exposed to multiple religions who all say they're true, it becomes very apparent that they can't all be right. And in fact, they're probably all wrong because they're contradicting each other. On the other hand, and I also think you would have to win an Academy Award if you had a poker face the whole time. Like, you're going to take your kid to the Mormon church and just be like, and when they drive home and say, well, what did you think of that? You'd be like, it's up to you. No parent can pull that off. We all are going to, even if we try, they can read the lines and our wrinkles in our eyes. They can see there's no way to be a purely neutral purveyor of different religious traditions and say, now, here they all are, take your pick. So it wasn't a shocking discovery, but I really tried to explore and tease out that dilemma. And so it's a dilemma because you're stuck with one of two options. You can either just say, fuck it, I'm going to raise my kid an unabashed atheist, and I'm going to just tell them why religion is, bad and why atheism is good, and know that I'm brainwashing them the same way a Catholic parent is. or you can try your best to be totally neutral, totally poker face, not influence them at all, which is, yay, I get points for not brainwashing my kid, but B, I'm doing something that is so inauthentic, so disingenuous, and probably not going to work anyway because I can't pull it off.
Well, and they're going to ask questions is the other thing, and I try to be honest with
Of
my
course.
views. So I say, okay, this is what I think and why, but I also tell them, look, go figure it out for yourself, because I don't want to. So I do try to encourage them to
Yeah.
be critical
And
thinkers.
that's the best. I think that's the best balance.
Neil
And
deGrasse Tyson
say it again.
Neil deGrasse Tyson did something that I thought was really amazing. He was talking about his kids, and one of them said, "Dad, I'm starting to think that the tooth fairy may not be real." And he said, "Well, really? Well, if that's your hypothesis, how would you go about proving that?" And he said, "So his child actually came up with a way to disprove the tooth fairy." And I was just like, that's actually pretty good. I did go. We with my family, it's like especially with the tooth fairy, what we do is we made sure they know for a fact it's us, but we never said it, and we still deny it. But we're like, oh, I'll literally, like, when my daughter goes to bed, 2 minutes later, I'll open the door and go, "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were." She says, "Daddy, you've got money." No, why would I have money? What are you talking?
That's right.
No, So it's like they know, but they're like,
That's
"Oh,
a good nice.
the other one, they're like, Daddy, everybody in school knows that the tooth fairy isn't real." I was like, well, if that's what they're telling you, okay, but um, but they will ask questions, so I presented when we were talking about Noah and the flood. I said, okay, this is what it says in the Bible. This is what it says. And if you just say it, just go out and say, this is what it says. And by the way, as someone who's actually read that part of the Bible, because many people haven't read it and they're like, oh, he had on two of every animal. No, he didn't have on two of every animal. And God changed his mind, by the way, on that. But nonetheless, you talk about, okay, this is what was said. This is how it went through. Like, wow, that sounds a little weird. And then she just equated it to Norse mythology. And if you don't sit there and say it as true, it's very evident and very clear that if there's a difference between that and but so I think you're right. We know if we don't sit there and say one is superior to the other, but the other, I told you that story, and that really did happen. And I'm sitting there going, and there are a lot of theists who have stories like that where they so wait a minute, if you're just going to teach all religions equally, that's the same thing as raising them to be an atheist. It's sort of like, oh, so you know that too. Yeah, I'm not the only one who knows what happens when you don't elevate one story above the others. The being in a whale for 40 days strikes me as a bit more problematic than it's at least as problematic as anything I've heard out of Hinduism. But so the other thing that I think is interesting is in this society in particular, atheists don't have a lot of support, and in fact, that kind of thing is discouraged because, okay, well, it's funny if Muslims get together and create like an anti-defamation league or an that makes a lot of sense. Everybody gets that. Um, any religion, any minority does that. Everybody gets that. If atheists do it, okay, well, they're trying to. In my view, what I've seen, it's viewed as an attack. First of all, well, gee, why should atheists need it? Trying to get it so that you can actually have a non-secular minister in I forget what the actual term was in the military, but that there was a huge a humanist, sort of a humanist minister who didn't really wasn't religious, but would still be there to try to comfort soldiers. There was like, well, wait a minute, and also the thinking that, well, every religion is protected by the First Amendment, but not having a religion, and that's one where people really. And I found people like, we have a gotcha, and we're going to go after atheists. So, is there a way that if you're an atheist parent, you can get support on this kind of thing? What chaplain? Thank you, that was correct. Appreciated. What kind of support is there? Is the lack of support an issue? Is there a way to correct it? And where do you see this headed? I noted earlier that you said that we're going to become more secular, and that it won't be the majority coming up. But so I asked you a very compound question there. So let me break that down to what support do atheist parents have if, or at a minimum, non-religious parents have if they are trying to raise their children secular, and what problems from the parents' perspective are they likely to face?
That's a multi-pronged question.
Dude, dude,
You,
dude, you came on this show willingly, sir, and I don't appreciate you dodging my.
do you want to know support, or do you want to know like? Okay, let me start
Let's
with the
start with the start with the easiest one and go from
okay.
that. I keep
So
asking
the
questions till one of
best
us
the
falls
best
unconscious.
organization for legal support is the Freedom from Religion Foundation. They have
Mm.
a wonderful contingent of passionate, bright, friendly, and brilliant lawyers who will immediately write cease and desist letters for you. So I'll give you an example. There was a principal in my school district, in a public school district, who was telling students they should be going to church. Not allowed to do that. So all you have to do is contact the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Their lawyer will send a letter immediately saying you're violating the Constitution. You're not allowed to encourage students to go to church, and blah blah blah, and cease and desist. And that usually does it right there. I mean, people get that letter like, holy shit. If they persist, the Freedom from Religion Foundation will file a lawsuit, and so they're the best, and thank goodness they're there because we didn't really have anybody that had our back. The American Humanist Association also has fantastic lawyers. Monica Miller is a rising star in the world. So if you're having legal issues, a teacher who's proselytizing, um, a neighbor who's putting up religious things in a public space, they're allowed to do it on their lawn or whatever. You go to the Freedom from Religion Foundation, you go to the American Humanist Association, and their legal teams will help. And I am not like I just am a member of both of those organizations. I don't run them. I'm not employed by them. I urge people to donate money to them as I do. So I'll just because I'm so glad they're there, and I've called on them many times when parents have come to me with problems and issues. If you're talking about deeper support, like finding community, going on nature walks, help when your kid is sick or you are sick, that kind of like social network, that's a bit trickier, but you simply start with going on looking up meetups. There are Facebook groups for secular parents. There are Facebook groups for people who are homeschooling their kids as secular parents because the public schools are too religious. Most homeschoolers are evangelicals. 78% of people who homeschool are religious fanatics. But there is a percentage of secular parents who are living in predominantly religious areas who have pulled their kids out because they're getting beaten up on the schoolyard for not believing in the Prince of Peace. So I would say it's easier now than ever to find other secular communities. There are chapters of the American Humanist Association. There are chapters of the oh gosh, what's that secular atheist church? I've already forgotten it now. I went a couple times but haven't been back. That was founded by Pippa. Oh gosh, Sunday Assembly. Sorry. There are Sunday assemblies and Sunday assembly like organizations. There's an atheist church in Seattle. There's an atheist church I believe it's in Austin. I mean, you can find, especially if you're in an urban area, there are groups for African American atheists. There are groups for Latino atheists. There are many groups for Jewish humanists and Jewish atheists. So if you want that kind of like communal support, you have to just get online and start reaching out and finding those people in your community and getting together for picnics and barbecues and charitable events and book clubs and so on and so forth. But for legal support, like if you're experiencing actual discrimination, FFRF, AHA.
I couldn't agree more, at least with AHA. I have no experience with, but the Freedom from Religion Foundation, I'm a big fan of, and I think there are a number of very worthwhile charities, and I think that's certainly one of them. We've dropped links to both of those. Thank you, Tony. All right, so it sounded like, however, now I get pessimistic, and I will tell you why. It seems to me that, and we actually just had on somebody talking about generations theory and about how every sort of fourth generation you end up with a war, or you end up and how and why that thinking is. And we are in an unusual time. It seems like our institutions are under attack in ways that hasn't happened in quite some time. Trump has taken off the gloves on that. We have a global pandemic. And it seems to me that at times like that, people do have a tendency to fall back on religion. So I've noticed the same thing you have. So the more secular a society becomes in general, the lower. Now let me rephrase that, because there is a correlation between secularism and literacy rates, secularism and lower crime rates. If you take a look at the Scandinavian countries, if you look at countries that as they become more secular in general, the happiness index goes up, lifespan goes up, a number of things. So there does appear to be a correlation. It sounds like you think the U.S. is headed on that path and that we are going to continue to be more secular. Do you think that's going to continue? And would it maybe be derailed by some traumatic national experience, such as a global pandemic or something else that might cause people to fall back into religion?
I agree with you that when times are hard, people turn towards the comfort of religion. I agree that during pandemics, during floods, during famines, during wars, when life is chaotic and your existential security is under threat, you're much more susceptible to religion. No question about it. And we don't even have to speculate. The climate change is real, and our planet is going to shit, and everything's going to get worse. Sorry. So on that one particular area, I actually agree with you that as shit gets worse because of climate change, and as white people get angrier because they're losing their status, we're going to see more chaos and thus more people needing the comfort and security of fairy tales. That said, I do believe that the true engine of religion is family socialization, meaning, yes, some people, as fully functioning adults, will hear the gospel and it's just going to move their soul, or they're going to get introduced to Mormonism and they're just going to buy it, or they're going to get introduced to Scientology. There are a percentage of people who, secular adults, but it's a very small percentage. The vast majority, overwhelming majority of people who are religious because they were primed in childhood by religious socialization by the people that loved them and took care of them and were their, was their world. That is where religion is reproduced, in the home, in the family, through socialization. When that is not there, so most people raised, all the data says, most people raised in secular homes stay secular. Again, a tiny percentage finds Islam, finds Christianity, but 80% stay secular. Then when you add the what Peter Berger called the plausibility structures of a secular culture that surrounds them. So they're not only being raised in a secular home or family, but everybody else around them is secular. The society is secular. The media is secular. The government is secular. It just makes that even more of a firm orientation. So I believe that as more and more people are non-religious, they're going to have kids and they're going to raise their kids, not all of them, but many of them, as non-religious. So that that's really where you're seeing the engine of religion starting to sputter and peter out. So even when shit gets bad, that doesn't mean people aren't going to turn to other false gods like nationalism, racism, UFOism, but the idea that, Jesus is my savior and my friend is going to, yes, it will appeal to some people as global warming takes over, but I don't think it's going to cause a widespread conversion of the secular populations. I think it's going to make religious people more religious. And you're going to see in the poorest nations, that's where religion is the strongest. The poorest nations are the ones that are going to suffer first and most from climate change. So they're going to get even more fanatic in their Christianity and in their Islam and in their Hinduism, more nationalistic, more tribalistic, as a way to cope with the dangers and threats of the world. But in places where secularism is rising, I think it's going to continue to rise. Places like Japan, South Korea, parts of South America like Uruguay and Chile, North America, Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, and Europe. I think you're just going to see it. I think you're going to see it increasing. Of course, that's the part of the world that has the lowest birth rates. Let's not also forget that demographic problem. The more secular societies have the lowest birth rates, the more religious societies have the highest birth rates. So even if there was no more war, no more pandemic, and global warming stopped tomorrow, just by birth rates and death rates, the religious have a huge advantage. But we're seeing that still apostasy is happening at a more rapid rate than the birth of new religious people. So people are opting out all over the world. Throughout the Arab world, we're seeing huge numbers of people opting out. So I'm quite optimistic about the continued growth. And we talked about atheism having a branding problem. Religion is getting a branding problem of its own. In many Muslim majority nations, the governments are oppressive and the people know it and they hate it. And so the Shahs of Iran and the dictators of Egypt and Syria, and they're giving Islam its own branding problem in Turkey. So the Muslims there who want democracy, they know that this Islam is not their friend, often, not always. And then here in the United States, Trump and DeVos and William Barr and Mike Pompeo and Ben Carson and those Kavanaugh, they are giving Christianity a real branding problem. The young people are noticing. The young people are taking note, and they want nothing to do with this fascist Christianity that denies climate change, denies women a right to their own bodies and reproductive health, denies that systemic racism exists. And no one has done more for the growth of secularism in America than the supporters of Donald Trump.
Well, was it Christianity Today came out and withdrew their support for Trump and said in a very So I think that's a good. Well, it may have something to do with how Trump signed his checks. I don't know. At any rate, oh come on, that was funny. All right. Well, I know you need to get going. I sincerely appreciate. I think this was a spectacular show. I really appreciate you coming. We are definitely going to want to have you back. We have dropped his website and his Twitter and everything he's mentioned in the Discord, not in the Discord, sorry, in the live chat. I will be in the Discord in a few minutes to discuss this. Actually, I may be a little late on the Discord, but I will be showing up in the Discord in a little bit to have this discussion. I will also be editing the description so that by the time most people see it, we'll have all his information there. I do apologize for not having that up. Was there anything else that you wanted to mention? Where can people find you? People want to learn a little bit more about you. There's philzuckerman.com. Is there any other way if people want to learn a little bit more about your work and what you do?
They can just Google my name. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the work you're doing. And thanks for raising great kids.
I do my best. Thank you, sir, very much. Thanks to Christopher Mowdy for also arranging this. So thank you for that. And thank you to our mods and everybody else. And we will see you guys shortly. Thank you much.